It's my pleasure to introduce this evening's keynote panel, the heads of the country's regional accrediting agencies. Joe Alice Blondin is president of Clark State Community College in Ohio and chair of the Higher Learning Commission. Daisy Gonzalez is interim chancellor for the California Community Colleges and commissioner of the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges. Heather Perfetti is president of the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. Sunny Ramaswamy is president of the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. Lawrence Shaw is president of the New England Commission of Higher Education. Belle Whelan is president of the Southern Association. Yeah, we've seen you before, Belle. We expect a lot out of you. Is president of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. And finally, Daniel Phelan will serve as the moderator of tonight's discussion. Dan is the president and CEO of Jackson College in Michigan. Let's give him a round of applause. Now, because we have so many excellent panelists with so many insights to share, we won't be sharing biographies of each speaker this evening. However, you will find their full bios as well as more insights from each of them about accreditation in the Trustee Quarterly magazine that you received in your registration bags and which has been mailed to all ACCT members. Please join me again in welcoming our panel.
Thank you. Good evening, colleagues. Good to be with you. You know, I don't know if it's just me, but it seems to be a lot of news about accreditation, whether that's at the federal level, the increasing cadence of negotiated rulemaking, conversations at the state level, governor's offices, certainly the local level and institutional level. Maybe that's just me. You know, we need to talk about the intersection of higher education and the Board of Trustees. And so we've got a few questions we'd like to share with you tonight. And the first question is really a two-parter. Number one, the role of a Board of Trustees as it relates to the institutional accrediting process. And secondarily, where do we go for professional development? If I'm a trustee, where do I go? Where's the best place to get that education? And Joe, I wondered if you could lead off as board chair for the Higher Learning Commission.
Sure. Well, the best place to go is certainly to your accrediting body. I know that I'm going to start with the second question first. I know with the Higher Learning Commission that the president or the liaison for your institution is happy to speak to your Board of Trustees. And in fact, best to do that proactively rather than to wait until there's an issue. So I would urge the board to, and also I would urge you to go to your conferences as well. But in answering your first question, first of all, the role of the board is certainly to be able to communicate and ensure quality in the continuous improvement process. That includes knowing your student success metrics and defining those metrics too for your college. Also, I would urge the board to put accreditation on every single board agenda. That may sound like a heavy lift, but if you have the opportunity to have a conversation or a presentation of any kind at your board meetings, it really does make accreditation something that lives rather than something that happens to you every 4, 8, 10 years. And that's really critical. And then the last thing that I'll say, because I know my colleagues will add to this, but I would also say, and this goes without saying, I know you already follow your policies, but please make sure you're following the written policies, making changes where you can if needed. But I would really focus on that policy governance model and make sure the CEO too is communicating those important accreditation timelines and deadlines for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Excellent. I really like the policy comment. Daisy, how about you? The same question.
Thank you for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. Buenos días a todos. Buenas tardes. It's great to be here with all of you. And I think to answer your question, I first want to put it into context where my comments will come from, because I think starting ACCT with this panel is more than just symbolic. This is about setting a new bar for where we are headed in higher education. which means business as usual can no longer be the story of higher education. And certainly the future of accreditation as a key partner, that is hopefully what we're trying to accomplish here. You know, for us at ACCJC, we have a wide range, a very diverse set of members at ACCJC. For boards, this work is not optional. Every stakeholder in an institution has a role to play, but for boards, this work is not optional. We have key standards at ACCJC. We have 4. One of them is strictly about institutional leadership and board governance. And so for us, professional development looks like this. At ACCJC, this work is about our annual conferences. We have a podcast, a manual, and I should share that for our manual at ACCJC, we look to all of our partners across the nation and ACCT. We quote them a lot in that manual. And we also then focus across partnerships. I happen to lead California's community colleges. It's a state agency in the state of California. We do a lot of partnerships with ACCJC because what they do impacts us as a state agency. And the last thing I'll mention is while PD, professional development, exists at the accrediting institution, at state agencies, it also lives locally. And that work really means your orientations, your annual reviews, the way that you hire. Your primary job is to hire CEOs that have an expertise and a talent in this work and want to engage you in an ongoing way about this work. Set leading and lagging indicators, evaluating them is critical. The last thing I'll mention is, as you're thinking about your annual retreats, every single item, no matter when it comes forward, should be connected. It should be telling a story about how accreditation within your institution is leading to student learning and student success.
Muchísimas gracias. How about see the other side here, the other Sonny from the Northwest Commission. Sonny, your thoughts?
There you go. Thank you very much for that reminder. Thanks so much, Daniel. So from our perspective as an accreditor, what I like to say is that we're available to you as Board of Trustees members. And reach out to us, please. And we, my staff and I, were more than willing and actually very happy to come to your communities and offer information about accreditation, how you might engage with your institutions, and give you what I refer to as accreditation 101 as well. And that's really, really important to do, to reach out to us, as Joe said and Daisy said as well. Getting to know us is really important. I was on my flight last night from Seattle, Washington to JFK, and sitting right across the aisle from me were members of Board of Trustees for Bates Technical College. And we started engaging in a conversation, and I learned that when it comes to accreditation, they know a good bit, but they didn't know exactly who I was and what I did as the Northwest Commission as well. That's what I learned. But Heather Moss, my apologies to you. I'm calling out her name too, by the way. In any case, I think it's really important to get to know us. I like to say that accreditation is a contact sport, as education is. I love the theme that you've got here. It is about improving lives. It is about changing the human condition. I think the community colleges have a tremendous opportunity to change that human condition. And so the boards of trustees, particularly in supporting that, the community colleges, have even a greater role to play as well. So this is a contact sport. Contact us, and we're here to support you and help you in what you do in your efforts as boards of trustees members.
Thank you, Sonny. How about Northwest? Larry, what do you have to say?
Yes, well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with my colleagues. So it's always fun to go fourth of 4. But 3 thoughts I will add. At the New England Commission, we send teams out to institutions every decade. And then in the 5th year interim, there's an extensive report that's due. But when we send teams out, one of the things we do every time is to set up a meeting with trustees, and only trustees, so president's not in the room, senior staff's not in the room, to have a candid conversation about the institution. And we encourage candor. It's one of the things that I think makes the relationship between accreditors and institutions work, that we can be candid on both sides. So we would encourage you to attend those meetings. We don't always see every trustee, but it's an important opportunity for you to spend time with your accreditor to have a conversation about the future of the institution. Second thing I will add is that, you know, we see accreditation, particularly on these on the cycles when we send teams out, as really a time for an institution to reflect upon its strengths and its opportunities to improve. And so, you know, I think sometimes people think of I sat for 30 years on your side of the aisle, you know, working for an institution, and sometimes you feel like, you know, this is something you've got to get yourself through. You're just hoping to get this behind you. But if you think about accreditation that way, it really is a lost opportunity. So we encourage you to. It's a time for an institution to step back and to reflect on what do you do well and where do you need to improve. And then finally, you know, in New England we have a predominance of independent institutions. We're seeing across the country institutions, particularly small ones, close. And 4 or 5 years ago, we had one in New England called Mount Ida that shut down sort of precipitously. And the Massachusetts legislature at that time passed a new law for trustees of independent institutions only to go through an annual financial training to sort of understand how healthy institutions look financially and how institutions that are under threats sort of appear on the finance books. It's not yet a process that we go through with our 2- and 4-year public institutions, but I think it would be equally valuable. It's the finances of higher education are unique, and it's important for trustees, all trustees, not just trustees on the finance committee, to have financial literacy on that.
Thank you, Larry. Well said. I particularly like the idea of looking at the accrediting process as an institutional reflection, an intentional reflection. Appreciate you saying that. You know, I intimated at the beginning of our session today about there might be a challenge or two on the horizon. I'm going to go to the chief prognosticator of all things change, and that would be Belle Whalen. Belle, I wondered if you could tell us what you see on the horizon, and what might you tell our colleagues about getting ready and maybe even keeping a weather eye on the horizon? What's out there, and how would you guide us?
Thank you so much, Dan. My crystal ball got broken on the way from Atlanta, but I'll try to recall what it showed me. I think there's several things. One is student enrollment, and you're going to have to work hard to make sure that students understand the need for college. There's a haze out there over higher education right now, and people don't feel it's necessary. But community colleges, especially with their occupational technical programs, are the ones who feed the economy. And so to help students understand the relevance of community colleges, I think is going to be tougher and tougher every day. The second is the financing of higher ed. Students don't understand the difference between a grant and a loan. They don't understand that grants are available. They don't have any money, and they figure there's nobody who's going to pay for them. And so trying to keep the word out there that there is financing available for students who want to make a difference in their lives. And then the third thing that's coming down, that's a bigger thing for us as accreditors anyway, maybe not you as trustees, and that's the politicization of higher education. For those of you who are appointed by governmental officials, it's very tough for you to tell them to back off when they start fiddling around with things like academic freedom and tenure and other things that have historically been the purview of institutions of higher education. But it's coming, and so I think you need to prepare yourself as to how you're going to be responsive to it.
Thank you, Bill. Sonny, how about you? Your reflections?
Yeah, I want to pick up on where Belle left it, which is as boards of trustees members, you are parts of the communities that you live in. And your voices are really, really important to be able to convey the importance of education and, particularly community colleges and what they do as well. So that advocacy piece of it is critically important. And I know a number of trustees across our region that are very engaged. They're involved in legislative actions. They go to their state legislatures and engage with those individuals. Many of you also come from a background having either served in the legislature or having served as a staff member or some such thing. So you've got those connections that you've got as well. I think capitalizing on those connections is really important. So the advocacy piece, considering the challenges that we've got, in regards to enrollment declines, budget reductions, you know, there's a lot of competing interests that legislatures and local community, you know, councils and such are all, you know, having to deal with as well. So in this sort of a cacophony of noise, your signal needs to stand up, that community colleges are the path to help America get to where we need to be as well. As Johanna said, you know, your institutions are really important in making sure that we can indeed provide the workforce, the educated, informed, engaged workforce that we need. So you have a critical role to play in that engagement, in providing that value proposition as well.
Thanks, Sonny. I appreciated that. Cacophony of noise. I'll carry that forward with me for a little bit. Let's flip to the other side. What are the thoughts Middle State has about the future? Heather?
All right, well, good evening, everyone, and it's certainly great to be among friends and colleagues from CUNY and SUNY, which are reflected in the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. So great to be here. I think what's most critical is to think about accreditation beyond an act of compliance. And so as board members, as you look toward your staff, your presidents, and others you work with approaching accreditation, leverage it holistically. Think about your institutional priorities around the work of accreditation so that you can celebrate it. You can actually enjoy accreditation, I promise you. The goal of accreditation is institutional improvement, and I already see presidents here who are our team chairs. They are the peers going out into the field to do the work of accreditation. You have expertise at your institutions, in your presidents, in your staff. Some presidents in this room are former or current commissioners with our accrediting agencies. So tap that skill and expertise to ensure how you can best assess the challenges that you face. And think about, as a board, asking yourself, higher education is changing. Your institutions are changing. I know there are criticisms about higher education not being innovative. We can all assure you that is not true. And so think about, as a board, what are you doing differently to support your changing institution, your changing communities? How have your needs changed? What has indicated those changing needs to you, which gets us to the critical nature of data? Are you using data to assess your own effectiveness as well as the decisions you're making? Be in a constant state of evaluation to ensure that you stay mission and student-centered. So I don't need to repeat the challenges that others have shared, but focus on stability. Think about succession planning. Financial and otherwise, whatever challenges that you may face, recognize the critical nature of every decision and how it impacts students and the changing nature and needs of your diverse student bodies. All of that will be critical as you process challenges as a board.
Thank you, Heather. You know, I have to admit, I'm still wrapping my mind around enjoying the accrediting process, but I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there.
We'll convince you of it.
All right, all right. Thank you. Joe, how about your thoughts on this one?
I would add to what Heather said too. Many of you are achieving the dream schools. Everyone in here has a strategic plan. And so I would strongly recommend too, just to kind of follow along with what Heather said, that you align and crosswalk all those activities, because that does make that so much more meaningful. It also gives your board a way to look at all of, through that lens of accreditation, at all of those activities. What's on the horizon for accreditation? And I'll also echo what Heather said. We are innovative. We really and truly are. And one of the areas that the Higher Learning Commission is looking at is accrediting different credentials that are out there. I mean, a credential is a 2-year degree. It's a 4-year degree. It can be a week-long class. It can be a credential that you achieve outside of higher education. What is our role? What is the accreditor's role in that process? And I'm just going to put a plug in at the website. There are 2 monographs on the new and changing landscape of credentials, and they're very, very helpful to boards of trustees as well. The last thing that I would say is to echo what Belle said. the student's right to know. Every college needs to be totally focused and student-centered around what should the student know coming in, and then how the future is, how do we capture student intent? I talk a little bit about this in the article, but the bottom line is that many students come to us and don't fit our current success metrics. 80% of the students at Clark State are part-time right now. 10 years ago, 70% were full-time. That has changed, and the notion of success for some of our students has changed. Whether that's one course and they pass that course and that's their measure of success, or if it is a credential of some kind, but not necessarily that 2-year degree. So I think we need to also look at how we're capturing student intent as colleges and how we communicate that with our boards, and then how we also find value in that through the accreditation process.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that intent is not intransigent. I mean, the students are constantly changing, so that suggests that an ongoing conversation and relationship with that whole unique student that we have to have. Let's move on the last question here, and I'll move back to this side. You know, the whole idea behind governance and the quality assurance work is really built on the fact that we've got to get governance right. It's not surprising to me that generally the criterion for evaluation for institutions during a comprehensive evaluation is really starting with the Board of Trustees. And the various accrediting bodies talk about good governance. So I wondered if you could tell me, Larry, and I'll start with you, could you give us your thoughts about what good governance looks like? What are those markers particularly, and what would you suggest to our trustee colleagues out here about how do they ensure that that is continually present at their institution, whether it's a visit or not, for the next 10 years?
Yeah, so one thing I'd say is that being a trustee of an institution, whether it's a public institution or a private institution, is not a part-time job. It's a volunteer job, which we all know, but it is not a part-time job. You are obligated to be aware of what's going on in that institution, not just 3 times a year when the board meets or 4 times a year when the board meets, but across time, across the institution. When we go in and send teams in to look at institutions that are not doing well, you can almost always trace their difficulties back to leadership, and almost always back to board leadership. And it's, so the role of a trustee, the role of a board is incredibly complex, it's incredibly demanding. Each of us have a standard around governance. Ours is standard 3, which says the ultimate responsibility for the quality and the financial health of an institution lies with the board. But one thing that we've seen when I started my presidency in 2005 in the great state of Georgia, under Bell's watch, I think there's 60-some, does that sound about right? About 60-some universities and colleges in the state. And so when I began in 2005, I was the baby, I was the youngest. When I left 15 years later, I had more seniority than any other president. So the turnover of presidencies is extraordinary at the moment. It used to be 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I think it now may be 5, maybe even under 5. Community colleges may even see more turnover than others. And so when you've got presidents turning over at that pace, the responsibility of a board is not just to hire and fire presidents, but it is to help lead, is really to serve as the leadership of the institution. And I think that has changed significantly over time.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Certainly the board's job of hiring their sole employee is their first and most important job. Well said. Since we're on this side, Belle, maybe I'll jump to you next and give you a chance to respond to that about good governance.
I think that good governance looks like governance and not administration. The challenges that we often have is that board members, because you have so many wonderful ideas and because you yourself have been so successful in your own business, you want to run the institution. That's why you have a president and a staff, is to run the institution. Your job is to govern the institution. And so we too have standards around governance, and we ask you to do 3 things: to make policy, to hire, regularly evaluate, and if necessary, fire the CEO, and to have the fiduciary responsibility of the institution. Good governance says that you evaluate yourself and you can show that you have successfully done those three things. If you do your role and you hold the president responsible for doing his or her role, piece of cake.
The immortal words of Belle. Thank you, Belle. How about on this side? Heather, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So I think that there are certainly commonalities among all of the accreditors in terms of what they're looking for from the governance. And I think that part of that is exactly what Belle and Larry have shared, and that is ensuring self-evaluation, making sure you are doing the assessment you need to be doing of the board so that you can determine that you're operating effectively. And if there are issues around roles and responsibilities and the understanding of those, they can be addressed. And that is all of value, not just during accreditation activities, but at any moment in time. I would add to what Belle and Larry shared about understanding data so that it informs decision making and in particular resource allocation. Knowing where the institution sits from a financial perspective and exercising strong fiduciary responsibilities is certainly something that accrediting agencies are going to have conversations with the board about through the team evaluation, and that becomes a critical piece of the work that boards must support and demonstrate. Others pertain to typical disclosures, conflicts of interest policies, other policies and procedures, but being really laser focused on mission and making sure that the board is driving the achievement of the institution's mission and goals in a way that is separate from running the day-to-day operations, but is making good decisions that contribute to the success of the institution and, most importantly, the success of the students.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. That was well said. You know, you reminded me of the kind of the trifecta of duties: the duty of loyalty, the duty of care, and the duty of obedience that all trustees share. And really to emphasize that idea of fiduciary, you know, it's more comprehensive than just financial, but it is important to get the finances right, and leaning into that and not let that fog kind of come over us when we see the balance sheet is an important step. So thank you very much for mentioning that. Daisy, your thoughts?
Very similar to the rest of our colleagues, but extremely proud of ACCJC and the transitions that we've done even during this pandemic, responding to our membership. When we think about board governance and institutional leadership, even adapting our own policies on social justice, that's one of our latest policies, adapting to what's happening at the statewide level and providing that clarity. I wish I had a recipe for you, but instead what I have is really more of a checklist. You know, at the top of that list is trust. We have an entire standard, and the climate that you create as a board is critical. Are you evaluating yourselves? What are your own ethics around a board? And what happens when you disagree? So trust is at the top of that checklist. The ability to understand the mission and vision of accreditation. And that goes back to your key roles. So when you look at our checklist for standard number 4, you see there are individual trustees, right, individual board members, but you act as a single entity. And you do not respond to a single stakeholder. You focus on the future of your students, of the families, of the communities that you serve. And in addition to that, that then brings you back to then analyzing what happens at your institutions, owning the outcomes of your institutions. Everything from metrics to the misalignment on the fiscal stability of your institution, short and long term. And that is the work that you own together. The other big piece in our checklist is really around your CEO. You want to empower and support. You set the guidance, but the CEO and the staff are leading the institution day to day. And that is really important, and it connects back to that climate that you create as a board in support of student success and student learning.
Thank you, Daisy. I really like that checklist, particularly leading off with trust. You know, we have people that thoughtfully come to this work. They give of their time and their talent and hopefully treasure, and they're committed to the love and the care and service of our students. And leading off with the trust is an important consideration. It reminds me of a book fairly recently called The 8 Pillars of Trust, something you might want to you might want to take a look at. So let me pause at this point, folks, and we're just going to open it up to all of you. I know we got some microphones out there, and there. If you got some questions, we're going to take a few moments, and I'll have these experts up here respond to your questions. I see a gentleman over here. We'll take your questions, sir.
I'm just the staff person monitoring the mic, so just come on up and ask a question.
Well, you're looking good. You're looking good out there.
It's collaborative, all safe, isn't it? Thank you very much for being here. My name is Reza Jafari. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees, Chesapeake College in Maryland. It sounds like you're giving us a checklist, you're giving us a blueprint, you're giving us a guideline and guidance that we need to go through. By the way, our institution is going through that process. The world of higher education and community colleges have changed, especially during the past 10, 15 years. In other words, this is not your father's community college anymore, as the song goes. What has happened from your side, from the accreditation perspective, that you think you have changed, so that change is going to reflect on us, so we can work together and start making our institution to be a better institution? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That must be a country western song, what's changed in the last 10 years. Thoughts, colleagues? Sure. Yes, Joe, you want to go first?
I know with the Higher Learning Commission, we've gone to a more student-centered, student-focused approach. I think that has definitely changed from I've been involved in accreditation for 30 years, and I remember the compliance aspect, and I think that you've got a group of leaders up here who are focused on the student success side as well as the continuous improvement. So I think that's been the biggest change.
Sonny?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I like to say that this accreditation is not your granddaddy's accreditation either. Every one of us has gone through a review and revision of our standards. In our own case, we used to have 8 standards and 142 substandards. We have only 2 standards now. Number 1, students. Number 2, governance and compliance. That's it. And what we've done is we have stayed with the movement that has taken place in America in the changes that we see in our institutions as well. And I think it's really important that each one of us can speak to this for hours on end about the changes that we've made. That's the third thing I want to share with you, is that in terms of what Heather referred to as innovations, that we help our institutions if they want to innovate, if they want to experiment and things like that. We give the opportunity for our institutions to do so as well. And in the good old days, 5 years ago, 10 years ago and such, we were accused of not providing those sorts of opportunities for institutions to innovate. We absolutely do. Mm-hmm. And so those are a couple of things that I can share with you that we're doing.
Thank you, Sonny. Daisy, you want to take a shot at this one?
Yeah, I think for ACCJC, there has been a big shift from compliance to continuous improvement just in the last 5 years. Everything from being able to adapt and centering equity both regionally, right, because we have a diverse set of members at ACCJC, but also for student demographics and student outcomes. What is important for me to say out loud is we want you to succeed. Right? Like, the goal is continuous improvement, and every single thing that we do, from the professional development to the flexibility. During this pandemic, our colleges were struggling with distance education, right? Particularly with students who were incarcerated. That was very difficult. We quickly shifted all of our policies, created an entire substantive review process as our colleges were thinking about baccalaureate degrees, as they were thinking about competency-based education and shorter credentials, right? We all learned that we didn't have to have a workforce program for 10 weeks. Now we could do it in 4 or 5 weeks, and that also meant that we were shifting. So what I can share is at ACCJC, we are those partners that are shifting, that are adapting, that are agile along with our partners.
Thank you, Daisy. Other questions? We have one more question maybe over here. Let's go ahead.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Vivian Malaulu. I am a trustee at Long Beach City College in sunny Southern California. I'm also on the ACCT Board of Directors. It's my privilege to be here with all of you. Could you all please speak on how big of a role or how big of an impact the board congeniality and relationships, what that plays into accreditation? And the reason why I'm asking is because it's been a hot topic for us, and I hear it amongst our colleagues, especially when we have sessions and workshops where some boards are 3-2, 5-2. There's definitely a dissension among the board. And you're talking about accreditation, so could you please address that, how important that is, and how much, whether or not the board gets along, plays into the recommendations that you make?
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, so we don't have a standard on congeniality, probably no surprise. But we do have a standard on board effectiveness. And so, you know, I think healthy boards have healthy disputes, have healthy conversations, and as someone said, act with one voice. We also, when teams go in addition to looking at interactions among board members, they're also looking at the interactions with the board, with the administration, with faculty, and board with students. So if any of those relationships fail, again, you're looking at an institution that is likely to suffer and fail.
Thank you, Larry. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead, Sonny.
So we have a situation, one of our institutions, this lack of congeniality ultimately has resulted in you know, the institution being placed on warning because of the board's inability to get along together, and that has had a very significant impact on the institution. So we're working with that institution now to help them get out of that warning as well.
Thank you. Thinking about congeniality, I keep thinking about Sandra Bullock as a trustee. Belle?
It also happens that as many of you have open meetings that the media enjoys attending, all PR is not good PR. And so bad behavior among boards gets reported because that sells papers and TV time and radio time. That impacts your enrollment because students don't want to go to a college where you all can't get along. It impacts funding because legislators say you all can't get your act together, so we're not giving you any money. And it impacts the reputation of the institution, makes it difficult for you to find good leaders coming in as presidents and vice presidents because they don't want to work with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Belle. Daisy, I'll give you the final comment.
They have options, right? They have options. I'll just add, you know, I think there's a difference between congeniality and collegiality. And so for us at ACCJC and the work that we do there, you know, it starts with mission and vision, right? And I think all of you are there. You love your institutions. You love your communities. You love community colleges and junior colleges. Where you tend to defer and kind of get lost in the cases that we get to see are then getting lost in that strategy, right? The strategy of how you implement. The trust is built. So if you think about at the checklist that I gave you, what you work on and what tends to kind of create the differences are strategy, but you should always be collegial. Your heart is in it. We know it's possible, and we all want you to succeed.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would also just add that you should absolutely start with what matters most, and that's the student. And at every board meeting at Clark State, we have a student story to start. And I think that it's very difficult to disagree with the changes we're making in students' lives. And a board can get really centered really quickly by listening to those students. And I agree that collegiality and congeniality are two different things, but I think that what Daisy's saying is a total mission-driven focus around students, particularly for community colleges.
Thank you, Joe. I think we're going to call that a wrap, folks. Please help me thank my colleagues here for the great job they did. Thank you very much, colleagues.